my name is Olivia Petter. I am an author and a journalist and a podcaster. I wrote a book called Millennial Love and the podcast has the same name. Student Beans has asked me to come in today to talk to you about consent. So obtaining consent is an incredibly important part of any sexual relationship. It essentially means that you have agreed with another person that you are both happy to take part in this form of sexual activity, whatever it may be. It's quite difficult when it comes to explaining how do you obtain consent, because it's not necessarily a clear-cut, can I do this, yes or no. It's a lot about reading verbal and non-verbal cues. So it's about reading people's body language, interpreting whether or not the person who you are with is happy to engage with you sexually. If you're not sure about that, always just ask the question. Can I touch you? Can I kiss you? Are you comfortable? And the other person will usually let you know, and really try and understand whether that person is actually comfortable with you, because someone might say that yes, you can do this, but if they're feeling pressured to do that, that's not really consent. So you have to have those really sensitive conversations, and it is a nuanced subject. It's not as simple as, there are all of these consent apps nowadays where people ask you to click a button to say, yes, I consent to this, and no, I don't. Those don't really work, because it's important to note that consent can be withdrawn at any time. So even though you might say yes to consenting on an app, someone might do something to you later down the line that you haven't agreed to, or you might change your mind, which is completely fair enough and completely fine. Ultimately, the most important thing is communication, and it's about being able to have an open dialogue with your partner about what you are and are not comfortable with sexually. And you have to be able to express your needs and desires, and whatever they may be and whatever you are not comfortable with, in a very healthy, open manner before engaging in any sexual contact with them. And if someone does something to you that you are not comfortable with, it's important to feel like you can communicate that effectively with your partner. So communication is absolutely the most important thing when it comes to consent. So consent can be given in many different ways. It depends on what you are consenting to with your partner. It can be a written form of communication, but typically it comes down to a verbal discussion. And it can be as simple as, can I touch you? Yes. I want to kiss you? Okay. It's those kind of conversations that is an explicit act of giving consent. Or it can be a non-verbal cue, if someone leans in to touch someone and waits before doing something, if the other person leans in to touch them too, then it feels like a consensual encounter. But again, if there is any confusion around it, the best way to go about it is to just have those verbal conversations and get that verbal exchange of consent so that there is no confusion about it at all. So if for whatever reason you don't feel ready to give consent to your partner and you're worried about how to communicate that with them, it's very simply a case of saying to them, I don't feel completely comfortable now. That doesn't mean to say that I might not want to engage in this particular activity with you later down the line, but right now I'm not comfortable. If you are with an honest, trusting partner who you have a good relationship with, which hopefully you are, they will completely understand, and there is no shame to feel around that. It's very simply a case of respecting each other's boundaries and what you are and aren't comfortable with and what you're ready to do or not. And just because you don't want to give consent to a certain sexual activity at that time, that doesn't mean that your relationship with that person has to end there and then. It's just maybe about slowing the pace down a little bit and just taking stock and just seeing how things go and waiting until you are ready to take your relationship to that next sexual level. And again, it just boils down to talking to your partner about that and being really honest about your feelings. So when it comes to going out at night and drinking and taking drugs, the issue of consent can become a little bit murkier, because obviously when you are intoxicated in any level, your judgment is slightly blurred and you might not necessarily make decisions that you would make if you were sober. So if you are engaging in any sexual activity in that state, It's best to just be quite aware of your surroundings and how you feel, and try and work out, do I actually feel that this is something I want to do? Do I actually feel comfortable doing this? Am I in the right frame of mind to do this? And it's a difficult thing to do because there is such a thing as having a blackout when you're drunk. And the truth is, if you can't remember a sexual experience, you did not consent to that sexual experience, because you have no knowledge of that exchange with that person. So if we boil that down, it's something that people talk about a lot because it's not really clear cut when it comes to the law. But the bottom line is, if you do not remember giving consent to someone, you did not give consent, and it's the end of. Which is why it's really important to just take, a lot of time when you're in that situation. If you are coherent and if you are sober enough, to understand that. But also it's really important to recognize if you're with a partner who is maybe intoxicated, they may be too intoxicated to give consent. And it's worth bearing that in mind always before you engage in any form of sexual activity when you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Just remember that that person's judgment might be compromised. And maybe it's best to wait until you are both sober before having that conversation about consent and actually engaging in any form of sexual activity. Well, if you don't remember giving consent, and if you do wake up that next morning and feel like you might have been sexually assaulted, the best thing to do is to confide in someone immediately: a friend, a parent, a colleague, a fellow student, a trusted professor, anyone you feel that you can trust, because they will then be able to guide you through the process. Because the truth is, waking up the morning after being sexually assaulted, something like that, is an incredibly difficult situation and an incredibly emotional, traumatizing thing to go through, and you might not be in the best frame of mind to support yourself. You might not want to report it, you might want to report it, it depends. You might want to go to the local rape crisis centre. There are all sorts of measures you can take. Your university will absolutely have a health service there to support you. You might want to go to them in the first instance. But absolutely, I think the most important thing to do, regardless, is to just tell someone, and so that you have someone supporting you through whatever the next process is, and know that you're not alone. And most importantly, don't blame yourself, because we live in a culture of victim blaming where very often survivors of sexual violence are made to feel like, well, you drank too much, you took too many drugs, it's your fault that you were in that position. That is absolutely not true, and we need to combat any victim blaming myths that we have been conditioned to believe. Starting university can feel really overwhelming when it comes to sex, because a lot of people will feel like they need to either lose their virginity, which is a phrase we absolutely need to move away from. It's very old-fashioned and quite offensive, but they feel like there is this pressure to have a lot of sex when you get to university, and the idea of Freshers Week, where you're going out 7 nights a week. It used to be characterized as a sort of promiscuous week where everyone's just having sex every single night of the week, and it can feel very overwhelming and feel like a lot of pressure. Just remember, you do not have to have a lot of sex when you get to university. You do not have to have any sex when you get to university. Just do what you are comfortable with, and do not let anyone put you in a situation where you are not comfortable. And you have total autonomy over your body and your choice, and never feel like someone can take that away from you. And yes, it might be Freshers Week, and yes, other people might be going around having lots of sex. You don't have to do that as well. You just do whatever you are comfortable with. So it's really important to understand that consent is a subject that affects everyone, regardless of your gender. It's particularly important to talk about it when it comes to men as well, who are feeling that sort of pressure of male bravado and feeling like they need to live up to some sort of hypersexualized version of what masculinity means. Everyone can be a victim of sexual assault, and it's really important to remember that you can absolutely speak up as a survivor regardless of your gender. And it's very important to feel comfortable with your partner and recognize that you can actually say if there is something that you have not consented to or that you do not feel comfortable doing, you have a right to speak up and talk about that with them. I hope I've answered all of your questions that you had about consent. If you have any further queries, please feel free to comment below. And remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and do share it with anyone who you think might find it valuable. And I will see you in the next video.